Hello, everyone. Good day to all. Welcome to this talk. This talk is on Yugabyte DB, a cloud-native distributed SQL for cloud-native apps, just to make sure that everyone is in the right talk track, right? My name is Srini. I'm a solutions engineer with Yugabyte. I have also Vish in the bridge. Vish is the director of solutions engineering practice for APAC. Vish is kind enough to agree to moderate the Q&A channel. So please keep your questions coming in the Q&A channel. All right, let's get started. What is Yugabyte DB? Yugabyte DB is a distributed SQL, which is essentially cloud native and Postgres and Cassandra API compatible, highly available, scalable, resilient, geo-distributed, strongly consistent open source database. I know that we have packed in a lot of cloud native characteristics of Yugabyte in this slide, but let's try to uncover all these capabilities as much as we can as we move on, right? Before getting into what is a cloud native distributed SQL, the obvious question is, why cloud native distributed SQL when we have so many other databases out there in the market? What is the need for cloud native distributed SQL? If we time travel back to the past, which is, this slide is largely relevant even in today's case as well. Most of the enterprise applications were built based on monolithic application architecture. That was the norm, right? Everyone is used to this architecture. A lot of applications, even in production today, run based on this architecture, right? Everything is tightly coupled, and this architecture is kind of logically split into multi-tier, where you have a user interface tier to interact with the end users components, and then you have a business tier and then data access tier that largely interacts with a single node database system, right? Sometimes you get to see a standby instance depending on your availability and resiliency requirement, which would be asynchronously replicating data from your primary database. But most of the times it would be like all of this tightly coupled application would always have a single vertically scalable instance of the database to talk to. This architecture has served us well. So as long as the workload is predictable, you'll be able to manage the scaling requirements with this architecture, but at the same time, it has other challenges as well. The scalability is hard. It's very hard to distribute the data horizontally across nodes. And if you want to really operate it in a highly, resilient fashion, it's operationally complex, and the number of steps that you have to do in order to activate your passive or the standby instance to be the active instance in case of disaster is painstaking, right? So it comes with its own set of challenges as well. And this architecture has served us well for a longer period of time until we reached the tipping point, right? Beyond which it couldn't really cope up with the growing business demands and ever-growing user base as well. So that's when microservices became mainstream. We started to see a lot of transformation in the application tier, where enterprises and developers start to build domain-oriented services that can be built and operated independently and autonomously, right? So these transformations started to happen in the application tier, plus the other set of ancillary services that the application tier-based services rely on, right? Not only from a technology standpoint, but also mostly to do with the people and process side of things that were built in the past. For example, devs and ops used to work in their own isolated manner. That has changed to more collaborative shared responsibility between dev and ops in terms of DevOps, where they are responsible for the services that they build and operated in production. And continuous integration deployment has become the norm, API-driven development, and so on and so forth, right? So we start to see a lot of transformation, especially happening in the application tier, where a single tightly coupled monolithic-based application is broken down into a bunch of microservices, right? And from a complexity standpoint, whatever the challenges that we had with if you look down from a database standpoint, whatever the challenges that we had with a single system, it's kind of extrapolated now, right? So there are a lot of services, domain-oriented services. They still have the same level of requirement, right? So you need to be able to scale your data layer seamlessly in line with your application tier scaling. And operational complexity is kind of extrapolated, and downtime is something that you can't afford to do, especially it's public-facing applications and so on and so forth, right? And also the evolution of the changes in the application tier in terms of microservices, modulets, and all these different different architecture patterns has led to various different discrete usage patterns as well. Certain services are predominantly focused on read-intensive operations. Certain services require high write throughput, write-intensive, and so on and so forth. And certain services are a mix of both, right? And we start to see patterns like CQRS and so on and so forth, where we were segregating our reads to a separate instance of the database and updates to a different instance of the database, just to deal with the scaling and the growth of the user base and so on and so forth. Which has led to, so we quickly realized that a single traditional RDBMS system is not going to scale when the application tier is going to infinitely scale horizontally across different clouds. Multi-cloud has become the norm and so on and so forth. Somehow the scalability part from a data needs to be addressed. So that's where NoSQLs came into existence, and NoSQLs seem to solve some of the challenges of traditional RDBS system in terms of the distributed storage, right? It provides a better architecture resiliency. Inherently, a cluster is being distributed across multiple nodes, and data gets distributed across the nodes as well. So the resiliency is being built into the storage layer itself. So if you lose 1 or 2 nodes in your cluster, you would still be able to operate your applications without much impact. And horizontal scaling is also being provided by NoSQL, so that the data layer is something that you can scale linearly along with your application tier as well. And geo distribution became the norm, and where you have globally distributed user base where the applications need to be distributed across different clouds, across different regions. We want the data to sit closely to our applications as well, so that we would have a better latency. The latency can be improved. Rather, if the user base is in US and the servers are sitting in the Asia, the latency factor is going to be critical, right? So we don't want to get such kind of bottlenecks with the data tier as well. And the downside of NoSQL is more about it gave up on 2 of the core features of a traditional RDBMS system, which is the SQL API compatibility. NoSQLs generally don't support SQLs per se. They have their own dialects and APIs. Depending on the various flavors of NoSQLs. At the same time, they are not ACID compliant as well. So the data gets replicated, but it does not ensure a strong consistency, and it does not comply to ACID properties per se. It rather falls into this eventual consistent replication property of a distributed system. Just to plot it to a real world example, if you take a e-commerce retail application for that matter, so this used to be a single monolithic applications with various modules to be part of the same application, like user sessions, product catalog, shopping cart, analytics, and so on and so forth. Essentially, that would be talking to a single node, right? And then passive standby node is from a resilience standpoint. But the combination of this one SQL database and different flavors of NoSQL database has evolved the architecture to be in this fashion. It's kind of really daunting, right? So it's kind of very complicated now. There are so many services from an application tier standpoint. And at the same time, each service is having its own flavor of the database per se, right? The financial data and reporting services use a traditional RDBMS system. In the case of analytics and user activities, you prefer to have a scalable white columnar database. And in case of building a product catalog service, you need a document store kind of NoSQL distribution, right? The challenge with this model is, though it's kind of addressing the problem to an extent from a scalability standpoint, but at the same time, from a consumption standpoint, as a consumers of these different products, developers had to give up on a lot of the core features of SQL per se. SQL API is not supported. And the frameworks and tools that were built around all this existing traditional RDBMS can no longer be used with NoSQL flavors. It needs to be either rebuilt, or you have to rely on, you have to build it on your own, or you have to rely on some third-party based libraries to facilitate those things. And developers had to do a lot of unlearn and relearning related stuff, new APIs, new dialects, and different set of features, how to interact with all those things. And that's a complexity that every developer has to go through, right? So end of the day, when you talk about developer experience, we want the developers to get started as quickly as possible, so that we want them to spend their valuable time and effort in terms of building, focusing on business requirements instead of learning the nuances of all these different services, right? And from an operations standpoint, it has it has rather become extremely complex now, because the runbooks and playbooks are going to be extremely different for a traditional RDBMS system, and the different flavors of NoSQLs as well, right? It's no longer the same. Operations team have to deal with a lot of different automation tools in order to bring in complete infrastructure based or service driven automation into the enterprises, right? This is really not that being expected out of the evolution from a data tier standpoint, right? Though it still addresses a specific set of use cases, but essentially what we need is, we need all the goodness that are being built into a traditional RDBMS system, like the SQL API compatibility and all the RDBMS features like ACID transaction support and so on and so forth. But at the same time, from a storage standpoint, we want the database service to be reliable. We want the data to be distributed across nodes, horizontally scalable, and follow wherever the app goes, right? So we want the data to closely follow the app so that you'll be able to better service your business demands in a reliable, consistent fashion all the time. The architecture evolution that's probably expected from the data layer is more about we want the data layer to be as nimble and agile as possible to the cloud native application tier characteristics as well, right? So whether it's microservices based architecture or the existing monolithic based architecture, whether you need one database per service or multiple related services sharing the database instance, you would be able to still provide all those operational characteristics like horizontal scalability, resilience, running it in various form factors, be it virtual machines or Kubernetes, or in various clouds like AWS, Azure, GCP, on-prem, bare metals, or so on and so forth. These are all the characteristics that are being expected out of a database system, but at the same time, it has to fulfill all of those core key tenets of a traditional RDBMS system as well, in terms of ACID transactions, SQL compliant, and so on and so forth. That leads us to the next part of this talk, which is Yugabyte, which is a cloud native distributed SQL for cloud native apps. Let's try to understand all of those cloud native characteristics that I talked about on a high level in the subsequent slides, right? The logical view of Yugabyte DB, this is again a high level architecture of Yugabyte DB. So we would be just scratching the surface for this talk, not going into deeper level discussions of Yugabyte. Rather, the focus is more about how Yugabyte as a distributed SQL is addressing a lot of use cases that we see today, especially from a modernization standpoint, right? Yugabyte DB is logically been split into three different layers. The bottom layer is very straightforward. It's to run this cloud native database in various form factors across various clouds, right? So that's pretty much self-explanatory there. You see all the supported cloud providers and the form factors there. And the core part is the upper half of the database itself, right? So we call that as the query layer. As the name indicates that it's SQL compliant, it's distributed SQL. So obviously the SQL compliant is baked into the query layer. The interesting part about the query layer is it's a pluggable query layer. Out of the box, it supports two different APIs. One is YSQL, which is Yugabyte Structured Query Language, which is compatible with one of the most popularly used open source database, Postgres. It's wire compatible with Postgres. Essentially, we reuse the query layer of Postgres to provide that compatibility. So most of the core features of RDBMS like stored procs, triggers, views, and all those things are essentially supported through this API. And on the other side, YSQL is Yugabyte Cloud or Cassandra query language, which has its roots in Cassandra API. So this is a semi-relational API, again, primarily meant to handle a lot of NoSQL-based use cases. If you are really looking for, IoT-based, write-intensive OLTP transactions or HTAP, hybrid transaction analytical, real-time processing, again, strongly consistent use cases, then YSQL is the API for you. So the query layer inherently supports discrete type of use cases, a single database, which essentially handles both your traditional RDBMS-based requirements that are based on YSQL-based API, and the more modern NoSQL requirements where you focus more on the write throughput rather than on the core RDBMS, sorry, RDBMS feature. And the middle tier is the core one. Essentially, the storage layer is the one that's fulfilling all the cloud native characteristics, like whatever I spoke about, distributed ACID transactions or distributed query processing across nodes in your cluster, self-healing and architecture resiliency, auto sharding and rebalancing of your data, and all those things are being taken care in the storage layer. And it's applicable whether you're using MySQL or MySQL based APIs, but these characteristics are consistent across both these APIs as well, whether you're looking for distributed ACID transactions or strong consistent replication of data, or auto sharding and rebalancing your data, and all those things are common for both these APIs as well. Under the hood, again, this is high-level architecture still. Like any distributed system, as you can guess, it has got two different processes. YB master process is the one that's responsible for looking after all the administrative related tasks that get initiated in the background, and the metadata information resides in the master service. And YB server is the core one that is responsible to manage your user data, right? As you can see here, this is a cluster with 4 nodes essentially distributed across multiple fault domains, again, depending on your deployment requirements. And what you see as, in the form of tablets are nothing but shards, right? So when you define it, when you create a table, the table gets split into multiple shards, and these shards get distributed across. And the way that we ensure strong, consistent replication is through a Raft protocol. So that's the reason you see some of the tablets are shaded in blue, some of them are in a light orange, and so on and so forth. So if you look at just the tablet one alone, what you see here is this is a cluster that's defined with a replication factor of 3. So what does it signify? So replication factor of 3 indicates that every object or every data shard that I create in the system, I always need to have 3 copies to be maintained in the system, right? It's more about defining your desired configuration, and the system makes sure that your actual configuration is always same as the desired configuration, right? As long as you keep the minimum prereqs requirements in place, right? So with the replication factor of 3, if you see the shard 1, which is tablet 1, you see 3 copies of tablet 1 distributed across 3 nodes. In a similar way, it does the same thing for rest of the shards in your system as well. And one tablet, the one that's in blue color, blue shaded box is the one that's the leader of this shard. And the role of the leader is to look after all of your reads and writes. Essentially, tablet 1 handles all of your reads and writes in a strongly consistent fashion, and at the same time, it ensures that the data gets replicated in rest of the shards that are residing in other nodes in the cluster as well. And it follows this Raft consensus protocol. The way Raft works is if you have a replication factor of 3, as long as two copies are held and running. So there is a formula that determines the majority, which is if you have an RF factor of n by 2 plus 1, copies should always be healthy in order to keep the cluster intact, right? And you get to see a lot of Raft group within this cluster. So a table gets split into multiple tablets, and each tablet and its associated copies would form the Raft group. And then that's how the replication factor gets ensured whenever a write gets committed to the tablet. And it synchronously replicates the data to rest of the tablets in the cluster. And then it also, the synchronous is the part that's important. That way it ensures that once it gets back from majority of followers, the data commit gets acknowledged back to the client. In that way, it ensures the resiliency factor as well. If you happen to lose this node, one of the followers would become the leader, and it continue to serve your read and write traffic, right? That's on a high level. And from a deployment standpoint, it again depends on the kind of deployment model that you look at, depending on your fault domains, whether it's a single region, multi-zone deployment across different zones in a region, or whether in a single cloud, multi-region deployment across different regions in a single cloud, or multi-cloud, multi-region, right? So Gigabyte as a cluster can be distributed across any of these fault domain options. And especially just to look at the cloud native characteristics from a database standpoint. This is primarily on the server side of things. What are the characteristics or the features rather being built into the product itself, right? As I said before, it's SQL compliant. Just to compare and contrast with the Wise SQL API with a traditional Postgres system. In the case of Postgres, you'll have a query layer and storage layer. That's a single node system. Whereas in the case of Yugabyte, we run the same query layer in a stateless fashion across nodes in a cluster. So essentially, this is a query layer process of Postgres that would be running in every node that has got access to the underlying distributed storage, right? So that it will be able to read and write data across nodes in a cluster. SQL API comparable, the key tenets like distributed data storage, replication, query execution, ACID transactions are fully supported by both YSQL as well as YSQL API. On the YSQL API front, again, this is built based on Cassandra query API, and it has all the features of Cassandra plus the strong consistency and distributed transaction capabilities plus native JSON as a native data type support as well. From a consistent replication standpoint, I touched upon it on a high level. The way how it works within a cluster is, so this is a single cluster with 3 nodes, and as you can see in the diagram, the replication factor is 3. So this ensures that you'll always have 3 copies of your shards distributed across the nodes, and it works based on the RAP consensus protocol. So that says that as long as you get acknowledgement from majority of nodes in the cluster, the transaction is tagged as a valid transaction and the data gets committed to the system, right? So you just need to ensure that 2 out of 3 nodes are always healthy. And the replication factor is something that you can scale horizontally as well. So if you need to have higher resiliency, you can go with the replication factor of 5, so that you can afford to lose 2 instances or 2 copies out of 5 copies. And still you'll be able to operate your system intact without any issues. And follower reads is something, this is also one of the features. So it would address a lot of use cases. Think of it this way. So every application architecture we deployed across different fault domains. So essentially the clients would be distributed as well. Especially if you are if you have a lot of microservices that are running on top of a Kubernetes distribution. Obviously, the Kubernetes platform itself would be distributed across fault domain, and then if you run multiple copies of your services, or if you have activated, horizontal scalability for your application layer, the clients are going to get distributed across. So this feature would be really useful. In the case of Yugabyte, I mentioned that all of your reads and writes are always served by your tablet leader. But if at all, if you are okay to read data from your followers, so which may or may not guarantee the most recent write, because the most recent write would always be guaranteed by your leaders. And at any point of time, you'll always have one leader for the RAF group. But at the same time, you'll have n number of followers. So if your clients also, I mean, imagine that you have a deployment that's spread across 3 different AZs, and you have client applications that will be coming from all 3 AZs, right? And the latency is assumed that it's significant across AZs, and you do not want to have your client to suffer that latency penalty, right? So for example, if clients are coming from AZ1, and if you want those requests to be served from the followers or the copies that reside in AZ1, then you can activate this feature as well. So instead of your clients talking always to the leaders for read queries, it can talk to those nodes that reside closer to the client, so that the latency factor is drastically improved, right? But this data may or may not be, strongly consistent. Depends on the quorum factor and so on and so forth. So if the follower happens to be one of the closely knitted with node along with your primary write leader, if it has already replicated the data, then you get the most recent write. If not, you get a time consistent data from your follower nodes. And you can extend this architecture to a geo-distributed fashion as well. So in this case, if you look at the deployment pattern, we have a cluster that is deployed in the Americas. So it's a cluster with 3 nodes. And assume that your user base is spread across the globe. And then you have significant amount of users coming from, APAC, South Asia region. You have significant amount of users coming from the Australias, right? And where they would be doing a lot of read queries to, maybe check in the case of financial application, they'll do account balance checking, or in the case of e-commerce retail based application, they do the product catalog lookup or some search queries or so on and so forth. If you want to extend those kind of use cases, especially from a CQRS standpoint, where if you want to segregate all your search-based microservices to be talking to their own set of instances or nodes, then you can extend this cluster with a bunch of multiple read replicas, right? Essentially, what happens in this case is this becomes your primary cluster. All your writes would go to this cluster, and the data gets asynchronously replicated to the read replicas that are again deployed across different geographies, right? So you can have a read replicas sitting in Australia that would be serving all the read queries from the user transactions originating from Australia. And so is the case for India as well. And here the data gets replicated asynchronously. So essentially it does not be part of the core RAP consensus, so that you'll have the liberty to run as many replicas as you want in this cluster. So if the primary cluster is with the replication factor of 3, you can have one of the read replicas with the replication factor of 6. Potentially, if you want to distribute it across 6 nodes, maybe across regions in GCP or AWS, and you can have another replica with a replication factor of 3, just to improve your read queries, so that just to keep all this data nodes as close as possible to your application or the user base per se. Another interesting pattern is the cross-cluster replication. The difference between read replicas and cross-cluster is, in the case of read replica, the data gets replicated asynchronously, and these read replicas are meant only for serving read queries. For example, if you want to have cluster to be distributed or individual clusters across different regions to be deployed in this fashion, you can do that as well. So one in the US, one in one of the data centers in Europe, or maybe another cluster, maybe one in the Southeast Asia as well, right? So in this case, this itself is a gigabyte cluster, and this is another cluster that's running in the European region. And these clusters can exchange data in both the directions. So reads and writes can go to any of these clusters. So any write that's happening in the US cluster would asynchronously replicate data to your European cluster as well. So this would be pretty much useful. Think of the case where users are accessing a cluster. Users from US are accessing a cluster, and 2 days down the line, if the user happens to travel to some region in the Europe, and if they try to access your application, they don't need to again go back to the US cluster. Rather, the data sits in the European cluster itself, right? So that you'll be able to serve the user data both in terms of reads and writes based on wherever your user base is located or wherever the users are traveling across the globe, right? So these kinds of deployment patterns are essential from a cloud native standpoint, because this is the transformation that's predominantly we start to see happening in the application tier, right? So the application services are kind of geo distributed, and we at the same time we expect the data to be distributed linearly, follow the application tier as well, so that end of the day, everyone is building applications to bring a better user experience, right? So if the latency factor is significant in case of multi-cloud or geo-distributed deployment, it's going to have a significant drastic negative effect for the company, right? So we want to get rid of all those things with these kind of discrete deployment patterns, right? I spoke about this two-way replication. Another interesting aspect with this geo-distribution model is about geo-partitioning your data. This is mainly to comply to all your compliance and GDPR-based requirements in the case of European region. If you want to pin your data only to a specific region, you'll be able to do that as well. So data originating in Southeast Asia should never leave Southeast Asia. Then you can pin those data based on either range or specific columns in your table to be placed in the nodes that are tagged in the Southeast Asia region, right? And the same thing is applicable for other regions as well. So whatever we have seen is more from a cloud native standpoint, the features that are built on the server side of things. We spoke about a discrete set of deployment patterns, right? From a resiliency standpoint, you can activate read replicas, or you can have active clusters with bidirectional replication across different regions and so on and so forth. And also I mentioned about we tend to serve our user base from a node that sits close to the user base itself or to the client application itself. This can't be done without building something in the client side of things, right? So we understand that database itself is distributed, but how would the client know that there is a node that's sitting in the same data center that the client itself is running, right? So that takes us to the next part of the talk, which is the application-based awareness, whatever that we have built in the client application itself, right? So we have built this library called Smart Drivers for both YSQL and YSQL APIs. Essentially, what it does is basically it looks after all those cloud-native characteristics that I spoke about, right? The cluster awareness, topology awareness, and shard or tablet awareness, right? What does it do essentially? So as I said before, if you take YSQL for this explanation, if you take YSQL as an API, it's wire compatible with Postgres. So essentially, the smart driver or the JDBC driver, whatever we have built for YSQL, it's built based on Postgres, right? So it's wire compatible with Postgres. We want to use Postgres, we can use Postgres to talk to Gigabyte. But if you want to leverage the smartness or the intelligence built in the driver itself, just to fulfill these characteristics, then you can use our driver. So what does cluster awareness mean, right? So this is a distributed system, right? Similar to the horizontally scalable nature of your application here. The database itself can be scaled out and scaled in based on demand, right? So day one, you can start with a cluster of 3 nodes, and based on the demand, you can probably 2 months down the line or on a need basis, you can extend your cluster to 5 nodes or 10 nodes or whatnot, right? The challenge with this model is traditionally what we used to do is we put a load balancer in between our application and the database here. And we have to let the load balancer know upfront the whereabouts of all of the nodes in the distributed system. So if you are going to add a new node to the cluster, then you have to make a change in the load balancer to facilitate equal distribution of load across all the nodes in the system. Essentially, what we tend to do there is we tend to get rid of a middle tier in place so that you can avoid that additional hop. Instead of your apps talking to your database, distributed database nodes via load balancer, rather you can have your apps talk directly to your distributed database nodes. So that's what cluster awareness does, right? So what this smart driver does is the smart driver is capable to auto discover the cluster state as and when it grows out or grows in, right? So the more nodes that you add to your cluster, it discovers the additional nodes whereabouts. Or if you tend to happen to remove any of the nodes from the cluster, it ensures that that node gets removed from your connection pool configuration as well. So this cluster awareness is being taken care of by the smart driver. It works more or less the same, whether it's YSQL API or YSQL API. And topology awareness is more about how the cluster itself is deployed, right? So the placement information of your cluster, right? If you have created a cluster in a 3-AZ deployment where AZ1, AZ2, and AZ3, then the driver would know what are the nodes that are running in AZ1, the nodes in AZ2, and AZ3. So if the request is originating from AZ1, and if it's a strong, consistent read or write that you're looking for, then it would ensure that that request gets routed to the leader that's residing in AZ1, right? And in the case of follower reads, or also if one of the copies happens to be in AZ1, then the driver would automatically route the client request to the nodes that are close by, instead of routing the request to AZ2 or AZ3, right? So that topology awareness is being handled in the driver, and that ensures that the request is always served by the node that's closer to the clients. And shard and tablet awareness is more about, as I mentioned before, a single table gets split into multiple shards. So essentially, you wouldn't know where these shards reside, right? So if you want to write to a shard that's residing in node 2, you wouldn't know it upfront. So you would be talking to one of the nodes randomly, and that node would figure out where exactly the shard 2 resides in the cluster. But in the case of SmartDriver, it populates a client cache, which is the state that's being used by the server-side nodes in terms of figuring out the shard location, right? So that cache is being built on the client side itself. So based on the data that you write to, based on your primary key, the partition key gets computed, and it know exactly which node to talk to. So this is massive in a distributed system, where it helps you to avoid a lot of additional hops, so that clients would be able to directly talk to the node to read and write data, especially in the case of single row transactions, right? And to look at the broader, Spring Boot based ecosystem integration, we support both the blocking and reactive integrations. As I mentioned before, Yugabyte has a Spring Data Yugabyte implementation that is based on Spring Data JPI that's on the blocking side of things. And also we do support Spring Data R2BC, which is again an implementation of Spring Data based on Spring Data abstraction, right? So whether you're building, traditional Spring Boot blocking based applications or WebFlex based applications, you'll be able to use the appropriate library based on your requirement. And the same thing is applicable for YSQL as well. As I said before, YSQL is API compatible with Cassandra. So Spring Data Apache Cassandra or Spring Data, reactive Apache Cassandra libraries can be used depending on whether you are building blocking or non-blocking based applications. I have just listed on Spring Boot here, but the SmartDriver itself is a library that can be used with other popular frameworks like Micronaut or Parkers as well. That's more on the application side of things. All right. Maybe this is my last slide. So since we have, I'll probably take 5 more minutes to show you a sneak peek of the database itself. Okay, so I have started a cluster in my local machine. So this is a cluster with single node. So if I need to scale this cluster to 3 nodes, it's just pretty straightforward. I've just initiated the scaling behind the scene from a different terminal. I mean, just to show you one of the cloud native characteristics of a database, right? So database provisioning should not itself is it's a complex activity, right? So if you want to really run your database in your local machine, let's say in a virtual VM or in Docker format, you would be able to do that as well. Or if you want to scale it out, you should be able to seamlessly scale it out in a matter of few minutes. So this is something I'm running in my local. So that's why it has happened real fast. This is running as a daemon process, but even in a real production deployment, in the case of VM form factor or Kubernetes form factor, that would happen in a matter of few minutes, right? So this is a cluster with 3 nodes. Like I said before, essentially it has got 2 different processes. So master is the one that's responsible for all the administrative related things, and T-server is the one that's responsible for managing your data. So this is a cluster with 3 nodes. As you can see the topology here as well. So one of the node is running in AP South 1A in AWS. Other node is in AP South 1B and 1C, right? So that's how it gets distributed across. So this is something that you can define based on how you are deploying your cluster to. And the same construct is applicable to on-prem as well, depending on your fault domains. So generally in the case of on-prem deployment, RACs would be the fault domain. So that's what you get to see in place of availability zones, right? And the configuration this is something similar to Kubernetes as well. In the case of Kubernetes, part of your deployment manifest is defined. Run 3 replicas of this application, right? Similar to this, in Yugabyte, you've defined the replication factor. So the replication factor is 3. I want this 3 replications to be equally distributed across my fault domain, right? So one should reside in 1C, one should be in 1B, one should be in 1D, right? So that's how we ensure the resiliency. So if you happen to lose a 1A availability zone altogether, still you'd be left with 2 copies of the data, so that your applications would continue to run without any issues, right? And so getting into the tables view, at this point of time, I haven't created any tables. Let me quickly go ahead and create a table. So I've created a table now. So this is a table that's created using YSQL API. As I said before, if you look at, so this is the table name is test. and the table is being auto-sharded automatically into 3 different shards. So essentially, we call internally we call them as tablets. So in this case, it runs on a single virtual CPU machine. That's the reason essentially I'm running 1 tablet per machine. But in a real production deployment, we'll have multiple tablets. Again, there's a formula that determines how many tablets to be created. And this sharding happens automatically. It gets auto-sharded, and at the same time, it gets distributed as well, right? So, so no single zone is the leader for more than 1 tablet, because the configuration clearly states that it needs to be equally distributed. So that's why 0.4 is the leader for 1 tablet, and so is the case with rest of the other nodes running in different AZs as well. And at the same time, since the replication factor is 3, in the case of tablet ending with 1539, the leader is sitting in 0.4, residing in 0.4, and the copies are in 0.3 and 0.2, right? So that's how it ensures that it gets equally distributed, right? So, and also if we get into the node view, we can see that all these things are distributed equally across the nodes, right? So 3 tablets in 1 node, and leader in rest of the nodes equally distributed. All right. So that's pretty much from my side. That's what I wanted to show you as part of the demo.